Hey, so good to see you again. Welcome back to this week's episode of Closed by Mo. My name is Mohammed. Everyone calls me Mo. I'm hopefully your favorite YouTube host on most things real estate in New York City and Long Island. And in this week's episode, we're going to do something a little bit different. We're actually going to dive into one of my recent multifamily deals that I've closed because there were so many lessons learned along the way for me that I think it's worth it to share to you, especially if you're someone that's thinking about buying or selling for the very first time a multifamily property, specifically to house hack in New York City or Long Island. So without further ado, let's jump right into this particular deal. We're going to look at all the good as well as all the bad and everything in between too. Now you'll have to forgive me if you see me looking slightly off screen because I'm just trying to look at all the details of the deal particularly. Now I will post the address here because we've already closed it, it's public record. The address is 4313 25th Avenue in Astoria or Long Island City, depending on which city map you're sort of looking at. I represented the owners in this property, so I was the listing broker. The owners were a very wonderful, quite nice, very calm, senior couple that had purchased the property a little over 20 years ago. This was their first and only multifamily property that they had bought in New York City. They had a couple of kids several years ago, and the kids had grown up in this house. Unfortunately for them, they faced a few health issues, particularly for the husband, who was the main breadwinner for the property. And, over the last couple of years, they've come to realize that, hey, you know what, they just don't have it in them to continue to own and manage this kind of property. And what they decided was, now that they're entering the last few chapters of their life and they want to enjoy it with their grandkids, they'd like to move somewhere closer to where their grandkids live down south. I won't, go over all the specific details because I don't want to share any personal information of the owners or their family. But all I can say is that the owners were getting a little bit older, and maybe they were having some health issues that was making it difficult for them to manage the building with tenants. They're reaching a point in their lives where it felt like it was the right thing for them to consider selling the property and moving on to the next few chapters to enjoy their retirement for the very least. Now, my main point of contact was not just the owners, but also the owners' adult children. One of them who was living out of state and who actually had a lot of experience in real estate down south, and had done a lot of transactions themselves, but obviously needed some extra help for New York City because it was their parents' home. I also had the lovely experience of working with the tenants on the first floor, who were extremely communicative, extremely cooperating with the entire process. These were the same tenants that the owners had actually placed when they first bought the property 20 plus years ago. So as you can imagine, the tenants have lived there for well over 2 decades. They've also raised their own kids and their family and everyone there. Believe it or not, is super, not uncommon, especially when you see, mom and pop owners that have owned 1 or 2 properties and have had the same tenants. In most cases, the owners are not raising the rent to match the market rate. So in this case, the tenants on the first floor were paying less than half of what the actual market rent was for a 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom apartment in Astoria or Long Island City, at least in those neighborhoods. The tenants themselves were pretty great. I had a great time communicating with them. They were not hostile, not adversarial whatsoever, which is totally different than the squatters in the basement. So unfortunately, to give you a little bit more color on this, the owners, to supplement their income to help pay for their mortgage, had to basically rent out their basement space. Now, the basement was finished out. It had its own sort of kitchenette, a little bit of bathroom too, and it had its own separate entrance exit. Now, I had advised my clients, hey, technically you're not supposed to be renting out the space. You can use it as a habitable space, so like for family if they're staying over, stuff like that, but technically you're not supposed to be collecting rent from it. And unfortunately, we hit the worst case scenario, which was that the folks that were renting out the basement by the room were causing a lot of issues for the landlords, and they had basically become squatters. They were not paying rent for the basement. They had actually brought in other people to come and live in the basement and were collecting rent from these people, but they themselves were not paying the landlord anything, and they were having a lot of fights, a lot of issues, coming home late at night, drunk, partying, fighting, causing a lot of issues, and they were not very clean. I mean, I took a look at the apartment, as they were vacating, and there was filthy, it was cockroaches, there was a mess everywhere, there was weird smells, things like that. It was a big project for the owners to have to clean everything up. Now what we're going to do is we'll talk a little bit more about how we dealt with the property from basement up, including the squatters, first floor tenants, and then the owners themselves, how we got it market ready, as well as how we were able to basically deal through all the issues that we had while we were under contract with the property, because it's never a clean deal, especially in New York City real estate. Now let's talk about the second section, which is getting the deal ready for the market and going into a little bit more detail about all those things I just spoke about. Now let's talk a little bit more about what had to be done to get the deal ready for market. Now, to give you guys some context, it wasn't just that the owner reached out to me through social media, or should I say the owner's adult children reached out to me through social media after watching my videos, and then right after the next day we were ready for market. 99.99% of cases that just does not happen. And typically what will happen, what I advise clients is, they'll reach out to me with very specific issues that they're needing help with. And a lot of my role is to sort of play project manager, advisor, broker, connect them with the right folks, attorneys, accountants, whatever it is, to help them get to that stage where actually selling the property on the open market is the best case scenario. And plot twist, in a lot of cases, the answer is no. So in a lot of cases, when people reach out to me and I sort of understand their scenario, I just tell them, hey, I don't think you should have to sell the property in this case because you can do X, Y, and Z. Now, for this particular property, because the owners knew that they wanted to basically retire and sell the home and use the proceeds from that to enter their retirement chapters of their lives and live comfortably, we knew that the eventual end goal was to actually sell and transfer the property. Now, for us to get the property ready for the market, we had to really understand what the buyer in this market needs. And guess what? I've worked with a lot of buyers at the same price point that are looking to house hack, that have bought and sold in Astoria and Long Island City before. So I had a pretty good idea of what this buyer wanted. And I always tell my clients, especially when we're selling anything, always start with the end buyer profile that's going to basically pay you the most funds. And the buyer profile that's going to be looking at a multifamily property, a legal two-family with a finished basement in Astoria, in Long Island City, is a buyer that is maybe already local to the area, is already very familiar with the area. They know they want to be in that area. And number two, that they're looking to buy something to live in, but also get some rental income from the property. This is not a buyer that is buying purely for investment. This is a buyer that will be buying this class of property as something to live in while also getting some rental income, whether it's from one of the free units or renting out the parking or the garage or whatever it is. Renting out is just I would say an extra source of income for them because most likely they're already going to be working a full-time job and whatever it is. So for them, they just want to get into the property ladder game and they're not really looking at it as a pure investment play. I would say 50-50 investment play. The other 50% is, hey, this is a home that they want to call. So all of the marketing and all of the strategy and the thinking that I was doing when I was advising my clients was behind that. So for example, to get into the nitty-gritty and start from the basement up, we had squatters in the basement. No way in heck, if I was representing buyers in this market that were looking to buy this kind of property, would I say, hey, let's buy a property with squatters in the basement and we'll take a risk, even if it means a price cut? Absolutely not, because we knew that if we wanted to attract the right buyers, we had to get rid of or at least deal with the biggest question mark in the property, which was the squatters in the basement. So soon after the seller started to engage with me and say, hey, we may want to list with you at some point or we need help with this, I started getting to work. And a big part of that process was focusing a lot of my energy in making sure that we were able to vacate the basement. And that even meant me showing up to the property, even before they retained me, knocking on the door of the basement and saying, hey, what's going on? Let's find a solution. What's going to happen? Do you need money, Mr. and Mrs. Squatter? Why are you causing such an issue? We've had to call the police out here a few times because you're basically threatening the other tenants in the building. This is a no-go. What do we need to get this issue resolved? Now, after a few times of doing that and also dealing with them in the civil courts with their property damage and stuff like that, we were able to successfully get the tenants out of there. I don't know where they went, but I believe 1 out of 3 of those squatters told me that they were flying internationally because they had to leave before the new president took office. I don't know what any of that meant. All I know is that we were able to deliver the property vacant, and I think a big part of that had to do with me physically showing up a few times at the front door of the basement and letting those squatters know that, hey, I'm not going anywhere and I know exactly what I'm talking about and I know how to play the system the same way that they've been playing it to take advantage of the senior property owners, because Mo doesn't play that game. And I will do everything that I can to represent my clients in the right way. Now, one of the things that I did know, of course, once we were able to deal with the squatters in the basement, is that we also had parking spaces and garages that were also being rented out. Luckily, the tenants of the garage were quite understanding and they knew that they had a certain runway to basically finish out their lease, and we told them that we don't plan on renewing it. Luckily, that wasn't an issue. I also knew, though, that 2 parking spaces and 2 garages, so basically 4 spaces total, was a big plus in this area because parking is so difficult, and this was not just something that the new owner could use as something to basically for their own vehicles, but they could also use this to generate income, because in Astoria and Long Island City, anyone will tell you, if you have a garage, you can rent it out for a couple of $100s to someone that's got a car, or maybe someone that's in construction that needs to store their material and stuff like that, especially if they're doing a lot of jobs in the area. Not uncommon knowledge, and this is definitely something that I try to focus in on when we were marketing. Ergo, the listing photos also highlighted the parking spaces to begin with. And by the way, a lot of people said, hey, they really appreciate having all that space, and they appreciated that that was something that I put at the forefront, because otherwise you wouldn't have been able to tell. Now, we were able to successfully list the property in June of 2025, so just a few months ago. And we did still have the tenants on the first floor, but luckily, like I mentioned earlier, they were quite cooperative. They were not hostile, not adversarial, very communicative. And as long as we had a structure in place on when we're doing showings and open houses, notices and stuff like that, they were totally on board. And we successfully, after all the marketing and making sure that the basement was vacated and we had the photos and everything, and we highlighted the right things, guess what? Within 2.5 weeks of going live on the market, we were already under contract. We only did 2 sets of open houses, I believe, and a couple of private showings with a few of my private buyers and some of my broker buddies as well that were very active in the area once we put it on the market. But within 3 weeks, we were able to go completely under contract with a great set of buyers that were represented by a great set of brokers as well, who understand the situation, who understood the situation about the tenants on the first floor that needed a little bit of time to vacate. Now, to clarify, when we were bringing this deal to the market, we knew that the new buyer would most definitely want the property to get vacated at delivery. It doesn't mean that they cared about tenants being there while they were showing, but they definitely wanted it totally empty because remember, they were probably going to be living in it and renting out one of the units. And in most cases, buyers with that mindset that are maybe first-time, second-time investors and they plan on living in the property, they don't want to inherit tenants for the good things or for the bad things. So again, it boils down to personal taste. But we knew going into this, that's why we were making sure that we told every prospective buyer that, hey, we will guarantee vacant delivery. Now let's talk about a little bit more about how that caused us some road bumps while we're in contract, but we made sure that we stuck to our part of the bargain. Now that we were finally under contract, we could actually focus on a lot of the admin and operational things that we needed. So as soon as we signed the contract, the buyers and sellers both signed, what I immediately, should I say, did was shifted my focus to making sure that I was able to do whatever I could to help relocate the tenants on the first floor. Because remember, when we signed the contract, we agreed to make sure we delivered the property vacant, and we put that in there in the contract as well, which I think is totally fine, especially if I'm representing a buyer and I want to, I tell the seller, hey, I'll buy it, but it has to be vacant. We're putting it in the contract. And if I'm representing the seller and the buyers want it vacant and my clients agree to it as well, we have to make sure it's in writing. This way it's binding on all parties. Now, because we were guaranteeing vacant delivery, 95% of my time after getting under contract on this transaction was spent on assisting the tenants to help them find another place. Now, to the tenants, good deeds as well. They were incredibly communicative. They never were adversarial or evasive. They didn't try and ghost me or do anything like some of the other transactions I've worked on. Yes, we did hit a few road bumps of trying to find the right solution for them, and we had a couple of issues with the credit and income situation and the paperwork situation with one of the tenants, but we were able to overcome it because basically what we said was, hey, look, we don't want to cause any issues for you to find another place, and you're a nice tenant. You've been great tenants with the owners over the last 20 years. You have a great relationship with them. We don't want to sour that. What can we do to help find a solution? And basically what they came up with and what we agreed with as well, which was, hey, look, let's find a middle ground where we can help pay for your relocation costs to someplace else. Even if we're not going to be able to assist you directly with finding something, at least this way you're not going to be coming out with anything out of pocket to help you relocate maybe to a nicer, bigger apartment, especially because now that the market price you'll be paying is more in line with the current market rate. So you just have to use a relocation cost to help with that. And that's exactly what we did. My clients weren't super excited to have to pay out of pocket now, but after I explained to them that New York City has some of the strongest tenant laws, let alone New York State, especially for someone that maybe is used to doing real estate in the South where it's a little bit more fair or maybe a little bit more landlord friendly, there were a lot of conversations had about what the expectations were when it comes to dealing with tenants, and to the buyer's broker's ability as well. They did a great job with managing expectation on their buyer's side, because I feel like the buyers also knew that, hey, this can of worms can definitely explode. Thankfully it didn't, and we were able to stick to all the different requirements that we had. Yes, there was a little bit of delay. We would have hoped to have closed earlier, and the buyers maybe would have hoped to avoid having to pay any kind of rate extension fees. But you know what? At the end of the day, we got it delivered vacant, and we were also able to accept a seller concession request from the buyer's side to help roll in some of their closing costs into the buyer's mortgage. All in all, the deal took a lot longer than we initially expected, but not as bad as some of the other transactions I've been working on. So I think all in, we were right about June, July, August, September, October, right about 5 to 6 months in, because we did close in October of 2025 after a roller coaster of emotions, back and forth. But you know what? I'm better for it, and guess what? My clients left me a great review, and the tenants also left me a great review because of how great I was able to handle the situation. So the way I look at it is that every single transaction is a learning opportunity. You're going to hit a lot of road bumps, but you know what? There's no such thing as a clean deal. And if you go into it with the transaction of like, hey, I'm going to hit some road bumps, let me see what I can learn from this, then you'll typically be able to manage your own emotional state a lot better. At least I did. Thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode, guys. I'll see you guys next week or maybe in a few weeks. I don't know, whenever I'm in the mood to make another video. Bye-bye.